Wrestling news, right? Now, Xavier Woods responds to the Undertaker's bad take on soft wrestlers. Okay, now Undertaker was on Joe Rogan, and I watched that shit, and Undertaker was he told his story how he broke in the business. This is what got me. When Undertaker was young, I think he was like 19, 20, and he paid Buzz Sawyer. So it's an old timer back in the day. I think his heyday was in the 80s. But he paid Buzz Sawyer $2,000 to train. Buzz Sawyer did train him to a certain extent, but it was like Greco wrestling moves. And then Buzz Sawyer had to leave to go work in one of the territories and left Undertaker high and dry. You know, I think a couple years later, he was like a success. He made it in the business, and he saw Buzz Sawyer in the bar. He was drunk, or he was drinking. I don't think he was drunk, but he saw Buzz, and he started talking to him. He was like, "Hey, so you left me, man?" Because at the time, he packed all his shit out of his apartment. Buzz Sawyer did, and he left his fucking dogs there. When Undertaker went to his apartment, it was like, oh, wow, he moved and saw his dogs somewhere in the house. And Undertaker took his dogs, his two gorgeous ass rock rollers, and he was like, shit, these are my dogs now. You stole $2,000 from me. I'm taking your fucking dogs. That was funny as hell. I'm like, shit, he went hard, Undertaker. Anyway, yeah, that was a good podcast, man. Undertaker, I like old heads to tell stories. I'm an old head, also. I'm 40 to y'all. Anyway, man, I just love older old heads, older than me. They got a lot of stories behind them. Anyway, you go check out Undertaker's on the Joe Rogan Experience. It's like 2.5 hours long. I mean, it's a Joe Rogan podcast. It's usually that long anyway. So, if you're a wrestling fan, go ahead and check it out. Anyway, it says here earlier today, I touched on Undertaker's interview on the Joe Rogan Experience, where the dead man criticized the WWE product for being too soft. He said there is too much pretty and not enough substance. I think I agree with that too, because I mean the times has changed. It's more positivity in them locker rooms as in society than back in the day, But before adding too many wrestlers, pay attention to what the internet is saying about them. Instead of following advice from the previous generation, it seemed to me like a situation where Undertaker raised some interesting points, but ultimately was assigning a little too much blame in the direction of the wrestlers. When I did not mention in the earlier post, in the Undertaker also talked about how the locker room culture was has changed over the years, while discussing the infamous moment when David Schultz slapped a rude reporter in 1984. Undertaker talked about how he preferred the era when the locker room was full of men who were men. And I quote, this is what Undertaker says, that that era of guys too, those were men. You go in the dressing room nowadays, it's a lot different. It's a lot different. I remember walking into my first real dressing room, and all I saw was some, like crusty fucking men, right? Um, Half of them had guns and knives in their bags. Shit got handled back then, you know. Now you walk in and there are guys playing video games and fucking making sure they look pretty. That was funny. It's evolution, I guess. I don't know what it is, but I just prefer when men were men. He comes from a different era. I don't blame him for saying that. You can't get mad at Undertaker for thinking like that. I mean, he's older. He came from a different era, so it is what it is. And you being mad, Xavier Woods, or feel indifferent any kind of way, I mean, you should expect this coming from the Undertaker. He's an old head, Xavier Woods probably my age or a little bit younger, but I don't know. It is what it is, man. Um, it makes sense the Undertaker prefers the kind of locker room atmosphere that he witnessed when he was brought up in wrestling business in the 80s. That what that's what he most familiar and most comfortable with. But it's also worth pointing out that the locker room culture of that era has helped contribute to a dark time in professional wrestling, or excuse me, pro wrestling, that has shortened too many careers and ruined too many lives. Xavier Woods put the following tweet, which doesn't cite The Undertaker by name, but definitely reads like a response to The Undertaker's opinion. Xavier Woods says, I wouldn't be the person that I am without the guidance and lessons of a few key people from previous generation of wrestling. They taught me about the business to save my money and that having video games in the locker room is healthier than having redacted, let's just say a weapon. Thank you guys. Woods finds a clever way to thank the previous generation for their help while noting that the locker room culture is a much better place now. Thus, today's wrestlers have changed the locker room culture to one of that is healthier, safer, and more welcoming. It's one of the best changes that the pro wrestling business could have ever made. Yeah, and I could dig that. I'm not in the wrestling business. I'm not a wrestler. I'm too fat to be a wrestler. But there were the fat wrestlers out there. Anyway, well, I don't know what goes on in the locker room, but based on the old timers that was younger in like shoot interviews or anything like that, documentaries, yeah, the locker room now is better than 30 years ago. It's more positive. Oh man. But there's still vultures backstage. I know most of them will stab your ass in the back and take your spot if you ever be a wrestler and you want time off. Shit, there ain't no time offs in professional wrestling because everybody, let's say you high up on the card and you say you want some time off and shit. There are 10 guys that's after your fucking spot. Because when you get higher, if you go higher up on that fucking card, there's more money involved. And everybody want to chase that bag. Anyway, that's it of this podcast. I think on YouTube, I'm going to have to split this shit up. So I'm going to be focused. I'm going to split it up. Oh, man, I don't know how long that's going to take me. Probably take me like 5 hours. Anyway, thank you for listening. I enjoyed myself. This is a good outlet for me. Just talking to shit and reading articles. I don't know. Anyway, you can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Anchor. You can share, rate, and review on my YouTube page, whatever. You can comment below. Social media links will be down in the description box. Hit that subscribe button and also click on that notification bell so you never ever miss another video. Peace. Whatever. I'm stupid. I'm sorry.